RNZ News at 5. Kia ora kōsu sana ata with DNA. The Finance Minister is promising to reveal details soon of how the country can cut its reliance on lockdowns and managed isolation. Addressing business leaders in Auckland today, Grant Robertson said the government will reveal its plan for easing border restrictions in the next few weeks. He cautioned, however, that changes won't be made overnight.
This is not about cutting a ribbon at the airport one day and everyone coming in, but it is about saying how do we use our vaccination process to enable us to start to reduce some of that down in a safe way, in a way that makes sure that we protect and lock in the gains that we made.
Grant Robertson says the government will also work with businesses on ways of attracting new workers and improve the skills of the current workforce. People appear divided as to whether returnees from Australia should pay for their stay at managed isolation facilities. The first two repatriate flights, one to Christchurch and another to Auckland, carrying about 100 stranded New Zealanders home, are due to land over the next 3 hours. The passengers' MIQ stay will be paid for by the government. Some people spoke to by RNZ in Auckland today say that's fair.
This was supposed to be like a isolation-free bubble, which is what it was when I left. And so, it's not really their fault, but it's not when they come back.
Others think it's unfair.
They went over knowing that if they got stranded, they had to make their own way home, and there are so many other people trying to get home, and there's only limited money, and with everybody, needing, business such as there's another lockdown will need money, things like that.
A group of epidemiologists has proposed revising the national COVID-19 alert level system. They say the current alert system is now outdated and also hasn't worked for Māori. In Strong reports.
Amanda Carlsberg of Otago University authored the comment piece with a group of epidemiologists, including Nick Wilson and Michael Baker. She says the revised model would have 7 levels, starting at 0, and 3 risk bands of green, amber and red. Mask wearing would be mandatory at certain levels, and particularly in indoor settings where the risk of super spreader events have been proved to be high. The group argues it would be a more rational and evidence-informed system which would better position New Zealand for the opening of international borders.
There's been a slight easing in the daily number of new COVID cases in Sydney, down from 112 to 89, but the 3-week lockdown due to end on Friday could yet be extended. The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is warning people not to become complacent and urging them to stay home except for unavoidably urgent reasons.
One day is not a trend. The numbers will keep bouncing around. But I do want everyone to know that our efforts will make a difference. Our efforts will allow us to leave the lockdown in a timely way.
The death of a Sydney man in his 70s has been confirmed as Australia's second COVID-related death this year. The government says healthcare services for children under 5 need to be fundamentally changed so that inequities for Māori and Pasifika can be addressed. A review of the Well Child Tamariki Ora program has found children are slipping through the cracks of an outdated system. The Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill says that while the system works for most babies, Māori and Pacific families, children with disabilities and those in state care are missing out.
The system is currently designed as a universal system that is accessible to every child. However, in practice, not every child accesses it. We realise that means we have to fundamentally change the system to make it responsive to everyone's needs.
Aisha Verrill says developing the new services will be a 3-year working program. It's 4 minutes past 5. And what could be the closest the All Blacks come to publicly admitting Fiji was a tougher proposition than they expected in the first test. Assistant coach John Plumtree says the Ndrua have certainly got their attention ahead of Saturday's second test in Hamilton. While the All Blacks ran out 57-23 winners, in some areas of the game they were equalled or beaten by Fiji. Plumtree says their work at the breakdown needs to improve.
Their forwards worked really hard in that match. You can see a lot of them come from European clubs where they're well coached and well drilled, and there was some stuff going on around the breakdown and that we have to be a bit smarter with. But Fijian side's certainly got our attention now, so I'm expecting a pretty tough test.
Meanwhile, a win over France tonight in Melbourne would give the Wallabies their first series win in 7 years. They reeled in a 15-0 deficit fit to take the opener 23-21 in Brisbane last week. Chris Gale has clubbed 67 off 38 balls to help the West Indies to a 6-wicket win over Australia in the third 2020 International in St Lucia, giving them an unassailable 3-0 lead in their 5-match series. Chasing a modest 142 for victory, the Windies reached the target with 5 overs to spare. And the US men's basketball team have suffered a second straight shock loss in their lead-up to the Tokyo Olympics, beaten 91-83 by Australia in Las Vegas, 2 days after losing to Nigeria. That's the news.
Big bucks for Miss Rehab. They are involved in crime and victimisation. I want to address meth addiction with those groups. They are perpetuating a problem.
A pregnant mother stranded in New South Wales.
I told them about my situation, how I am trying to find the earliest flight back as soon as possible.
And the search for a lost orchid pod.
It's very young, still not weaned, and suspect was very reliant on its mother.
You can rely on Morning Report, weeknights from 6 on RSPdx.
Now the short forecast from mid-7 to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, a few showers about South Taranaki, Taihape and Kapiti today. Frosts in many places tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, rain easing to showers tonight, clearing tomorrow. Central and Southern Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, showers tonight, mainly fine tomorrow with morning frosts. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from a few showers on Banks Peninsula this evening. Morning frosts tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight. Showers developing tomorrow, turning to rain with some heavy falls. Possible thunderstorms south of Ortega from the afternoon. Otago and Southland, mainly fine tonight. A few showers about the south coast. Frost tomorrow morning, then rain developing in the evening about Southland, Clutha and Queenstown Lakes districts. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora e ho tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. Welcome to Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, Sir, Fiji's COVID crisis is about to spin out of control. Yesterday saw another record number of cases in Fiji and the death of a teenager. The morgue is reportedly full and hospital services are strained. Last week, Prime Minister Franklin Bainimarama announced a no jab, no job policy for civil servants. As we go to air, the nightly curfew starts in about an hour and the streets of Suva are already starting to empty out. The UN's official in Fiji, Sanaka Samarasinghe, says the island nation is battling conspiracy theories and more people need to be vaccinated.
There is a great deal of concern, of course. People are quite anxious because of the continuing trajectory of the pandemic, the rising cases, number of cases. Yesterday we broke yet another record with almost close to 900 cases in one day. And of course, as you know, we're hitting about 700 in the last 7 days. So it is quite concerning. But of course, on the flip side, I think there is also some hope in those of us who can remaining cautiously optimistic, because the vaccination campaign that the government has undertaken with the support of Australia and New Zealand and India and the COVAX facility is going really very well at this point. We've got more than 60% of population, the eligible population, with at least one jab and about 12% with 2 jabs.
But is your infection rate outpacing that vaccination campaign? I mean, quite frankly, has Fiji lost control of the situation in terms of COVID infection there?
Well, in terms of infection rate, yes, it is concerning because
Is it out of control?
I wouldn't say it's out of control because, I wouldn't say that it's out of control because I think it's not just the infection rate. We need to be mindful of the people who are ending up in hospital and unfortunately dying. So for now, and again I emphasize for now because this could change in a week or less even. But for now, the numbers that we've seen, although they're increasing, ending up in hospital, are relatively low when you compare it to other countries, especially where they've had the Delta variant. And the number of deaths that we've seen on a daily basis is also relatively low. Of course, even a single death is too much. And yesterday we had a very sad situation where a 15-year-old died of COVID-19. So I wouldn't say it's out of control at this point in time. But clearly, if we all don't take this very seriously, it could spin out of control.
Recently you said it will come to a point where infrastructure in Fiji will not be able to respond to the crisis. Have you reached that point yet? And if not, how far off is that?
We haven't reached that point yet. Thankfully, we've got a brilliant team of people, Fijians on the front lines, who've been working really hard over the last 3 months. They're probably quite exhausted, if you ask me. So we're getting close to the point where we'll have to, rethink how to support them. I'm really pleased that we've had Australia and New Zealand deploy people here. We've got, of course, UN colleagues, especially from the World Health Organization and UNICEF, who are augmenting their teams and bringing in supplies, etc. And, of course, a number of people providing technical support online and from a distance. So all of that is happening. Field hospital has been set up. And, again, as I said, as long as these numbers that end up in the hospital remain more or less what it's at now, or not much more, then I think we'll still be able to weather the storm. Because I think the way Fiji is looking at it, the idea is to try and get to that sort of so-called magic number, although I'm not sure it's very magical, but still we need to get to that degree of herd immunity that some other countries have. And so getting to whatever, it's 12% now with the 2 jabs, getting to 80% is still, a couple of months away at least.
When was the last time you were out on the street to able to witness with your own eyes what people are doing? And can you tell us whether Fijians are taking this very seriously or not?
I try to stay off the streets as much as possible. That's, of course, the instruction I've given also all my staff and, of course, my family. But I do have to, as you know, because of my work, I do have to go outside once in a while, and I've been out there yesterday. Look, what I can see is that people are wearing their masks when they're going to shop, to the supermarkets or walking on the streets. And generally speaking, it seems that now there are less and less people coming out onto the streets. I think people continue to be worried. Where it is concerning is not so much, what you see on the streets and what you see in the supermarkets, but where people actually live. And as you know, especially here around Suva, there are a large number of people who live in settlements or in communities where people's homes or houses are very close to each other, and sometimes large numbers of extended family live under one roof. And so even if you do have less people out on the streets, quote unquote, so to speak, you could potentially, in those areas, have more people mingling with each other. And that was the case about 3 weeks ago. There were too many people who were not following the rules, not wearing masks, sitting around. It's a very cultural thing, of course, as well in the Pacific, to be together with the community, and it's very difficult for people to adjust to this kind of behavior, but of course it's vital. So, unfortunately, there were still cases of people sitting together, drinking grog, sharing pillows and cigarettes, and hanging out within their own community.
So is the leadership...
I can't tell you for sure that's changed that drastically yet.
So has the leadership been strong enough in Fiji then in getting the message out, setting the agenda and following the rules? Has it been strong enough?
Well, getting the message out, there are a couple of different messages to get out. I think one is to get the message out to get people to change behavior. And, initially the focus was on getting this message out through the medical teams and led by their permanent secretary for health. And in recent times, we've also had the Prime Minister now come out and speak very forcefully, and also the police enforcing.
But the Prime Minister, with the greatest of respect, has only surfaced recently with a video that was recorded some time ago. And if you want people to follow a really strict set of rules, doesn't leadership need to come from the top? And has that been happening in Fiji?
The way that the decisions are made, Prime Minister and the whole of Cabinet have been engaged with the Permanent Secretary of Health every day from the outset. And we've been part of it as well as the UN and the World Health Organization. But I agree, it's really important that, especially here in the Pacific, that people hear their leaders speak out. And I think it's not just the Prime Minister, though. I mean, it's really important that all of us who have any kind of leadership role speak out a lot more. I'm talking about people in politics across the board, in the other parties. I'm talking about church leaders and community leaders. And that's one of the things that we've tried to support the government to do, is to get sort of broad buy-in and get people's voices out. And you probably have seen that. One of the key challenges that we face at the moment is the anti-vaccination campaign, and unfortunately there are certain groups that have spread that message across, and we need more people to come out and say, look, it's really important that you get yourself vaccinated to keep yourself safe and keep your community safe, keep your family safe.
And that is Sanaka Samarasinghe, who is the UN's official in Fiji. The warning was flyer beware, but the Prime Minister says that doesn't extend to the bill for MIQ. Planes have been landing this afternoon, bringing back travellers from New South Wales. Under the arrangement, they'll be taken to MIQ for 14 days, but unlike other returning Kiwis, they won't have to pay for it. Ane te kai ripoata a Chinju.
When the Trans-Tasman bubble was announced in April, New Zealanders were warned they should be prepared for any eventualities. This was Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in early April.
Those undertaking travel on either side of the ditch will do so under the guidance of flyer beware. People will need to plan for the possibility of having travel disrupted if there is an outbreak.
At the time, MIQ said people would have to stay in its facilities at their own cost if there was an outbreak in Australia. But those returning from New South Wales now don't have to pay for their 14-day stay. Anyone entering MIQ has to pay $3,100 for the first or only person in the room, plus $950 for each additional adult and $475 for each additional child sharing that room. On the streets in Auckland, some people think it's unfair the taxpayers are picking up the bill for those returning from New South Wales.
I think they should have to pay. I mean, they went over knowing that if they got stranded, they had to make their own way home, and there are so many other people trying to get home, and there's only limited money, and with everybody needing, businesses, if there's another lockdown, will need money, things like that. I just don't think it's fair that, they come in, because a lot of people did not go out. A lot of people haven't, traveled at all because of the whole, paying $3,000 thing, and I'm one of those people. I haven't seen my family in like 2 years.
However, some people support the government's stance.
They were given the opportunity to travel by the bubble opening by both governments, and it's not their fault that the bubble has closed. I think it's fair that they don't have to pay coming back, not knowing that they would have to go into MIQ. This was supposed to be like a isolation-free bubble, which is what it was when they left. And so, it's not really their fault that it's not when they come back.
The Prime Minister says the flyer beware message meant people might be stranded or compelled to comply with isolation or pre-departure test requirements or even stay in MIQ. But she says when the bubble was introduced, the government had already decided to cover MIQ costs. And some travellers are already feeling the pinch.
Very difficult to expect someone, for instance, who's travelled overseas, then get stuck for multiple weeks, then to be told that they'll be shouldering several $1,000s to come back when they did not necessarily have any reasonable expectation that might happen. This is about us both bearing the brunt of some of what has happened in New South Wales. It is nobody's fault.
The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, denies there has been a U-turn in government policy. He says it's impossible to anticipate every potential scenario, and decisions are made based on the risk at the time. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the cost of providing MIQ for those returning from Australia depends on how many people are coming back.
There are certain costs which we have to bear with if the rooms are there. Doesn't, in a sense, matter particularly whether or not it's a person from New South Wales or a person from anywhere else. And I wouldn't hesitate to make that. I would hesitate to make that prediction.
The National Party says they would consider charging MIQ returnees. Jacinda Ardern says 1,000 rooms are available for them, but she's not sure about demand and believes it could take weeks to get everyone home.
Homai Aficionado would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Nō reira anei ngā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. So, back of the envelope, if you think there's about 2,500 people stranded over there, just over $3,000 a hit if they all come back through MIQ, it's more than 7 million, closer to 8, but we'll give them a bit of a discount. There's probably kids in there and some people will share rooms. So, let's call it 7 million. What do you want to do with that money? Spend it on MIQ or something else? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e Hariaki nei. The Viking Bay COVID cluster grows and another ship comes ashore. Radio communications from a shot police officer have been played to a jury in Auckland today. Eli Epiha has pleaded guilty to murdering Constable Matthew Hunt and dangerous driving causing injury after fleeing a traffic stop and crashing last June. He denies the 4 shots that hit Hunt's colleague were attempted murder. Katie Todd has been in court and a warning some parts of this story may be distressing.
I was shot like that. I've been back. I was shot. I'm bleeding a bit on my leg.
Those were the words of Officer David Goldfinch recorded on his radio. Some members of the public cried as they heard recordings today. The sound of gunfire captured on CCTV and the silence from Matthew Hunt's radio. On the witness stand, Rainella Drive resident Troy Dean, who was at home with his mum on June 19th. He'd been getting ready to go out for a date when he heard screeches and shouting and then shots.
I remember 3 shots, just really distinct. I think easy to make out. That it's not a firework or a car muffler.
Minutes later, St. John officer Joanne Stewart arrived on the street. Today she remembered seeing armed police, civilians and dogs around her, and being aware an armed offender may still be in the area as she approached an officer lying on the ground. It was David Goldfinch, who had been shot 4 times. Ms. Stewart said he had a graze on his hip and 2 jagged-looking puncture wounds on his leg.
He was calling out in pain, but we managed to get him up off the floor by supporting him on our side onto the stretcher, which we put adjacent to him.
At hospital, she said paramedics avoided letting Goldfinch see his colleague Matthew Hunt, who had been shot in the back. St. John's paramedic Catherine Jackson had been trying to revive Mr. Hunt since she got to Rainella Drive and took over from police officers who'd been performing CPR. In a statement, she said she gave him ECG, fluids and shots of adrenaline, but he was already in cardiac arrest. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Emergency medical technician Trent Hurst tended to a Rainella Drive resident hit by a car during the incident. In a statement read out by Crown lawyer Brian Dickey, Mr. Hurst described finding Mohammed Sattar conscious but bleeding from his head.
Mohammed's wife was with him and they informed us that Mohammed had been putting luggage into the boot of the car as they were going on a family trip to Rotorua. Mohammed couldn't recall if he was hit by the car or what happened, but all he could remember that he was leaning in the boot and then being dragged back into the driveway by his wife.
Detective Sergeant Corey Brown was the officer in charge of the scene. He arrived before the paramedics, when the engines of the police car and crashed car were still running. He said his first priority was preserving life. Later, he had to work out exactly what had unfolded on Rainella Drive. Photos were placed before the jury, who were told where bullets, casings and damage were found. Mr. Brown said bullets hit a driveway and a fence. One lodged at a gate, others hit a tree and punctured the wall of a house. The trial is expected to take up to 3 weeks.
15 15 mariners on the foreign fishing vessel Viking Bay, which is now moored in Wellington, have been infected with COVID-19. The Spanish flagged ship arrived in Wellington yesterday, and the 15 fishermen are now holed up in a quarantine facility in the city. Meanwhile, another Spanish flagged ship has been to shore in New Plymouth today to have its crew tested, with almost everyone on board experiencing flu-like symptoms. Ko taku hoa and nai called Ben Strang, and Ben is in our studio in Te Whanganui Atara. Kia ora, Ben. Is there anything more that we know about the Viking Bay and its crew at this stage?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, there's, as you say, 15 of the 20 who are now in managed isolation. The 5 that are remaining have stayed on the Viking Bay at Queen's Wharf in Wellington. They are allowed to remain on the ship because they're negative. Have tested negative so far for the virus. At this stage, one of those 15 who have tested positive, they're one of the first 2 cases who tested positive over a week ago. They tested positive and were found to have the Delta strain. At this point today, they were going through the genome sequencing for the remaining cases to find out exactly what strain some of these other cases may be. You'd bet your bottom dollar that it's highly likely that some of these people have the Delta strain, just based on how transmissible that strain has been and the sheer number of cases there have been. I did ask the Ministry of Health if they are going to be doing extra testing of those extra 5 people who are left on the ship. Usually it's just a day 0 and a day 3 test for people as they come to shore, and then a day 7 test, whether they would maybe test them daily based on the number of these tests. That is something that it appears is going to be looked at.
Given that we've jumped from 2 cases to 15, quite a high number, are health authorities still confident that this is a low risk to the community?
Yeah, it appears so. Based on the measures that they put in place as they came to Wellington, as they came to port, they put in obviously a lot of measures, as I mentioned yesterday, as they came to shore. There were a lot of security staff, police there. They had fully vaccinated staff on shoreside to run things as people came to shore. The health staff were fully vaccinated, all wearing PPE. As I say, there were centre port staff who were the linesmen helping to bring the ship to shore. Centre Port actually told me that the linesmen who came to help them came to shore. The 2 linesmen, they are now actually going to 7 days of isolation just as an extra precaution. They went straight home after helping bring the ship to shore. So they're going through extra measures to try to ensure that the public safety is there, that this can't get out into the community.
So then we've got another sort of parallel issue. We've got this other ship, the Playa Zahara, and it's berthed at Port Taranaki. So what's happening with that one?
Yeah, so what we know so far is that 15 of the 18 crew members on that ship have been displaying flu-like symptoms. They came into shore at 9:15 today, according to the Taranaki DHB. One by one, they were tested as they got after they arrived at the port there. It took about 2 hours for them to be tested. They were then immediately sent back out to sea. So at about 2:15 p.m, the Playa Zahara was sent back out to sea, and it's now sitting about 10 kilometres off the coast of New Plymouth. Those test results are going to take about 2 days. They should come back on Thursday. It's uncertain whether they'll have COVID. Basically, the situation's a bit different from the Viking Bay, which, of course, they didn't allow to come into Port Taranaki. They refused that. They had to send it to Auckland or Wellington. They say that this boat has been out at sea for more than 3 weeks, so they say that the risk of the mariners having COVID in this situation is lessened. They haven't had contact with any other crews. That said, if there are any positive COVID-19 tests, they will not be allowed to return to Port Taranaki. They will have to go to another port. If they return negative tests, they will be allowed to come back into Port Taranaki, and they'll be granted permission to have a crew change. So that's the situation with the Players Ahara at this point.
Ngā mihi mō te rā. Good to talk to you, Ben. That is Ben Strang joining us from our Wellington studio. It is 29 minutes past 5. Kia alo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. 2 orca sightings have been reported today in a large-scale mission to relocate one baby orca with his family. The baby orca, who's been named Toa, was separated from his family over the weekend. Our reporter Kirsty Frame and cameraman Dom Thomas have the story.
Back at the Plymouth Boat Club, north of Wellington, little Toa the orca has spent a third day in the harbour while the community rallies to find his family. As Dr. Ingrid Visser, founder of Orca Research Trust, says, it's not just the Wellington region that's keeping up with the search and support.
So this has gone from a community event into a nationwide event, and now it's gone global because we're in consultation with people all around the country and also around the globe, and everybody's pulling together to try and help this little guy.
The Department of Conservation is working with veterinarians to gather advice from scientists overseas to monitor his health. The calf was still weaning from his mother before being separated, so overnight he was given fluids from the vet team. Dr. Visser says it's made a big difference to his health and buys them more time to find his family.
Look, nobody enjoys having a tube stuck down their throat, but he was remarkably calm. He actually gave a little excitement call the first moment that the warm water hit his stomach, so I think he was quite happy afterwards.
Today, the search for his family continued. 2 sightings raised hopes, first way north in Marsden Point, and later much closer to home in the Marlborough Sounds. DOC sent out its vessel to search, and 2 volunteer aircraft tracked north and south of the area. Josh Hay from the Kapiti District's Aero Club says members of the club have funded their resources for the search.
We've got the capability to really, if there's anything down there to be spotted, we can see it a lot easier than someone sitting on a boat. So it's just a small way to give back, and the pilots are only too happy to do that.
The community has banded together over the past 2 nights where temperatures have gone below 0 degrees. Wetsuits, weather gear and plenty of kai have been sent to the large pool of volunteers working around the clock. DOC's Marine Species Manager, Ian Angus, says further plans depend on the health of the orca.
Obviously it depends on the welfare of the calf, and that's something we're monitoring carefully. But, past experience has taught us that calves can survive for a while, but obviously what we want to do is, maximise the chance of a successful outcome, but also constantly monitor the welfare of the animal and make decisions based on what's best for that individual animal.
DOC is still urging the public to report orca sightings, particularly between Marlborough Sounds and Whanganui.
A checkpoint. Parliament is to mine all there is to know about cryptocurrency. Why? More on the COVID crisis in Fiji and what New Zealand can do. And whare prices have jumped almost 30% in the last year. Well, my Aficionado, send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or we do love a good email, so you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Ko Susana anō tēnei. Kia ora. There are fears Fiji's COVID-19 crisis will wheel out of control with another record number of cases and the death of a teenager. The nation's main morgue is reportedly full and hospitals are struggling to cope. New Zealand's St John Ambulance Service is sending emergency vehicles and life-saving clinical equipment after a request for help from its Fiji counterpart. Meanwhile, new COVID cases in Sydney have reduced from 112 to 89, but the 3-week lockdown, which is due to end on Friday, could be extended. The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is warning people to stay at home and not to become complacent. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says changes to ease New Zealand's reliance on lockdowns and managed isolation will be made in the next few weeks. He says it will involve managing the vaccination program to reduce the current restrictions. Mr Robertson has also told business leaders in Auckland today that the government will work with them on ways to attract new workers and improve the skills of the current workforce.
An independent economist predicts that there will be a further slowing of the housing market as more homes are built, population growth slows and interest rates rise. The Real Estate Institute's House Price Index, which measures the changing value of property in the market, rose 30% in the year ended June. The national median house price increased 29% to $820,000. But Cameron Bagri, the managing director of Bagri Economics, says recent monthly movements show the market is already easing. The Athletes' Village is officially open for the Tokyo Olympics 10 days before the Games begin. 18,000 competitors will stay on the site, which contains 21 residential buildings. The athletes will be subject to strict coronavirus prevention measures, including daily testing, and will not be allowed to move freely outside the village. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen PNA. Ko taku hoa naianei, ko Nana Peltier, who's in the studio to talk about the business news. Let's start with the food prices, right? News you can use. So upwards, pricey veggies, is it?
Very pricey. In fact, the largest rise for vegetables in over 4 years. And that pushed up the increase from the month of June over May, 1.4%. And when you look at it over the year, it's 2.8%. Now, we talk about vegetable prices. That's, just the way that the numbers are calculated are both just straight line, this is how much that costs, and or seasonally adjusted.
Yeah, because we need to emphasise that, Nona, because when we talk about this, people text us and email us and say, capsicums are out of season or whatever, they're expensive. But so that they know, these are seasonally adjusted prices, so that takes that into consideration already.
Right, so the vegetable prices rose 15% in June, but if you adjust for the seasonal adjustment, it's an 8.5% increase, and 8.5% is still a very big increase. It is. And so this is typical. We normally see vegetable prices rise this time of year. It's winter and so on. But the statistics say that this increase is larger than usual. And so, for example, the only fresh vegetables to drop in price this season has been the kumara, pumpkin, and mushrooms. Everything else is up. And some of them are, eye-watering. Like, for example, capsicum rose 27%. And tomatoes and cucumber prices both up 52%. So they're not small increases, and overall that does add to your food budget for sure.
And what are they saying is driving this in particular?
Well, I guess it's also supply chain issues and, just the availability, I suppose, would be partly to blame. And, of course, it's winter. So, vegetable prices are more expensive, and this year we've noticed that a lot of things are a lot more expensive, and it's not just food. It's also restaurant meals are up, and what were some of the other things that dropped? Kiwi fruit dropped 24%. Instant coffee down 4.9%. So there were some drops in prices. Pork leg, for example, down 10%, and kumara down 10%.
Okay, so you say that kumara, pumpkin, was it, and mushrooms are the only ones to not sort of blast through the roof in terms of prices? Is that right?
Let me go back to that. Yeah, kumara, pumpkin, and mushrooms were the...
Okay, 2101 on the text. What's your best recipe for kumara, pumpkin, and mushroom? You get extra points if you can put all three of them in the same recipe. As soon as they're cheap, let's see what you do.
With the pork leg.
Okay, let's move on. Small and medium-sized businesses are investing in expensive software they might not need.
Yeah.
I mean, what are they buying? And is it the fair factor after looking around at ransomware and all the rest of it?
Well, look, they did a survey. This company called Dynamo did a survey, and they found out that of the 300 small, medium-sized businesses that they talked to, they reckoned there was a risk that some would overstretch because instead of just, say, maybe looking at 3 pieces of software, they were looking at 16. And a good number of them, 40%, had no plans for how they were going to implement these changes, and another 25% just gave up altogether in making a plan. interestingly, medium-sized companies were interested in cybersecurity, number one, rated number one, whereas for small businesses, they said it was number 12. So it looks like people need a bit of advice, and they probably should get some. Find somebody who can advise on your technology needs so you don't waste your money and you get the most bang for your buck.
Okay, let's take a quick zip around the market.
Right, so our index rose about 0.2%, 22 points up to 12,785, and the dollar really quite steady at 69.9 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and 50.3 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Beltier with the Veggie Report and other business news. Now, let's stay with dollars and cents. Parliament is mining for data on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Now, cryptocurrencies are a type of digital cash that's not managed by a bank, but by networks of users online. And MPs will look at how they're created, traded, used, or misused. Now, Finance and Expenditure Committee Chair Duncan Webb admits he knows nothing about them and joins me now. Duncan, why the quest to find out more?
Oh, look, I think I was kind to myself. I know nothing about cryptocurrency. But look, I think the fact of the matter is that they're an emerging asset, and we really don't know quite how they work. And a lot of people are investing in them, and I think a lot of people, they really don't know what the volatility is. And there's also the question of what opportunities are there, both in respect of the currencies themselves and that underlying technology, which is important as well, which is obviously got huge benefits in terms of security. So it's not all on the downside, it's on the upside as well. We want to really inform Parliament and understand whether the government ought to be looking at regulating or encouraging this kind of technology.
Well, I suppose it's potentially an opportunity for a government, isn't it? Because you're thinking about revenue and tax and whether you can get something out of this. Is that one of the motivations as well?
Oh, well, gathering revenue is certainly not a motivation for this. This is just, the committee thinking about what really is current and what needs to be looked at. The tax position is something we will look at because I think people think they can sort of buy and sell Bitcoin, and of course it's anonymous, and other cryptocurrencies, many are anonymous, and therefore it's hard to understand how much money is being made when people speculate, but that speculation and the profits are taxable.
So I know you said it's a fact-finding mission and some of it's on the upside, but what is the fear here? Are you thinking that, criminals are using this because of the anonymity?
Well, look, in terms of cryptocurrencies themselves, many of them, they've only got intrinsic value. They've only got value because people are willing to accept them. And one of the great benefits of them is, so-called benefits, is that they're anonymous, that you can't identify who paid you, and you can't trace it anywhere. Now, in terms of how we fight crime, follow the money is rule number one. And it's very hard to follow cryptocurrencies. So we do know that criminal organisations are using cryptocurrency, and the government recently sold $30 million worth of crypto, which it had seized as part of a criminal enterprise. So yes, it's a concern. It's not the driving concern. It's also things like monetary stability. I mean, one of the key features of a government is that it issues the currency for the nation. And if that's supplanted, or if the currency we're using becomes kind of second quality to cryptocurrencies which are more secure, then we want to know about it and look at the future. And the Reserve Banks were really interested in looking at this kind of thing.
You would appreciate the Inland Revenue is already gathering information on cryptocurrency, right, and requesting from investor agencies customers' details who are trading in cryptocurrency. So how is your investigation or deep dive going to be different from what IRD is doing?
Oh, well, look, IRD's got a particular focus. It's looking at whether people are meeting their obligations and paying tax. We're taking a much more stand-back overview approach because, you've mentioned already, or I have, the criminal aspects to it, the suggestion that perhaps our own Reserve Bank should be looking at this as a future way to issue currency. It's a very much a big picture, and the availability of this technology more widely in terms of making transactions secure, using currencies, for example, which you can limit the use of. I mean, we issue currencies, or the government makes transfer payments to all kinds of people for a particular purpose. This kind of technology can identify who can spend the currency and what it can be spent on as well. Now, that's all blue skies thinking. There's nothing on the government agenda. Remember, this is a parliamentary committee with people from every party. But there's all those kinds of things that are open to explore.
Duncan, does the government even have the power to regulate this currency? I mean, is the law fit for purpose? If you did check this out and think, ooh, we need a bit of a tweak here, there, or wherever, does the law actually, cover something as modern as this?
Well, and that's the point, that we do want to look at both what cryptocurrencies are and understand it better from a parliamentary sense, but also understand whether the law that currently governs it is fit for purpose and whether work needs to be done. Of course, there's always risks that this kind of activity falls entirely outside of the law, and that one of the drivers to the way that blockchain and Bitcoin was designed was so that it can't be regulated in the way that sovereign states usually would regulate currency. So that's a really big, important question that we want to address.
Ngā mihi mō te rā. Good to talk to you. That is Duncan Webb, who is the chair of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, which is taking a closer look at cryptocurrencies. The government is making no apologies for failing so far to lay out a clear roadmap for when and how the borders might reopen as people are vaccinated for COVID-19. But watch this space. The Deputy Prime Minister says there are more details coming and they're only weeks away. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A meeting of minds and scraping of plates. Business leaders met over lunch in Auckland today with hopes of hearing the government's long-term plan for the border.
I appreciate that we all want certainty, precise dates and times for when things will be normal again. We'll try to give you as much of that as is possible, but it's not easy in a fast-moving pandemic. And we don't want to mislead you or send signals that see you make decisions that you'll regret.
It wasn't the level of detail from Grant Robertson many businesses were hoping for, but there was a commitment.
We will, as we have throughout COVID-19, keep providing updates, keep listening, and keep responding decisively and swiftly.
But some say they deserve more. For months, opposition and business voices have been calling for a long-term strategy for answers to the big questions. When will vaccinated travellers be able to skip the stay in managed isolation? What level of vaccination will be required, and what other restrictions, if any, might they face? Michael Barnett from the Auckland Chamber of Commerce says it's not too much to ask.
To me, there's any number of opportunities that we're just missing out because there's a void there.
The ACT Party's underwhelmed too. It points to the Australian government, which this month unveiled a 4-phase roadmap out of the pandemic. Ex-Deputy Brooke van der Velden says New Zealanders are sick of being left in the dark.
New Zealanders are looking for certainty. There are businesses in New Zealand that have been struggling to want to know that this government has a plan to help us move forward. They either don't have a plan at all, or they don't think we're adult enough to listen to it.
But hold up, there is the glimmer of a plan on the horizon. The government has tasked a team of experts and modellers to consider how restrictions might be eased as vaccination rates increase. Grant Robertson says their work will be made public in the coming weeks.
We've been getting advice about that. We'll share that advice and we'll share our response.
It won't be a return to complete normal to the world before COVID-19. But it will be a step closer. New Zealand has been successful in shutting down and locking out the virus, but opening up may prove even more challenging.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Moriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, why New Zealand needs a revised COVID alert system. House prices have jumped almost 30% in the last year, according to new data from the Real Estate Institute. But one economist says hidden within that are telltale signs things are starting to slow down, and an interest rate rise may be the story of the coming year. Timothy Brown has more.
Nationally, the median house price reached $820,000 in June, a 29% rise on 12 months prior. Auckland continued to break records as its median house price hit $1.15 million last month. The Real Estate Institute's chief executive, Jen Beard, says the usual winter slowdown just hasn't eventuated.
Our expectations are usually that we will start to see a slowdown over the winter months, but this June house prices have continued to defy expectations, with every region across the country experiencing an annual uplift.
The Institute's data shows demand remains hot, with more than 7,000 residential properties selling last month, the highest for a June in the past 5 years. That is coupled with the lowest median number of days to sell a property since 2016, as it took just 31 days on the market for homes to sell last month.
We absolutely have a classic supply and demand challenge at the moment. There are very few properties available on the market to sell, and demand is really strong.
The government made moves in March in an attempt to dampen down the housing market, but Kiwibank senior economist Jeremy Couchman says they haven't had the hoped impact.
The moves that were made on tax and lending restrictions, they seem to be having some impact, but it's quite muted, much more muted than what I think many had hoped. We'd expected that this would probably be something that would take some time to build as investors sort of weigh up the options in the market, but it certainly hasn't brought the market to a grinding halt at all. So we saw sales activity pretty solid in the month of June, and house price growth just continues to track along.
He expects house price growth to ease from here, but potentially slower than expected. Cameron Baggery, Managing Director of Baggery Economics, reckons the market has started to ease.
Because you can hide an awful lot in annual numbers. So if I look at the monthly movement, or what we've seen over the past 3 months, the market's still pretty strong, but it's definitely eased.
And recent monthly movements have shown the market going from a gallop to a canter.
If we talk the last 3 months, house prices are up 2.4%. You multiply that by 4 to get an annualised movement. Well, you're up about 10. Now, 10 is still a really strong market, but it's not telling the same sort of story in regards to the annual movement, which is up 30%.
The government has signalled its intent to move on housing affordability, increasing the Reserve Bank's toolkit to assist in that endeavour.
The property market at the moment is probably in that category of pretty much a very good thing. Now, we want the property market to be sort of going up, but when you see property prices moving up at 30%, that doesn't just become an economic issue. It becomes a pretty wide-reaching social issue in regards to housing affordability, the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Cameron Baggery says a lot more houses are also being built. Population growth is down, and with a rise in the official cash rate likely, a further slowdown in housing prices is possible.
Possible sightings of orca pods have raised hopes a young orca may be reunited with his family. A large-scale mission is underway to relocate the baby orca Toa, who was separated from his family over the weekend. Teams have been out searching for 3 days, while the community in Plimmerton and Porirua has been doing what it can to help the orca. Ian Angus is DOC's Marine Species Manager and joins me now. Ian, what can you tell me about the pod sighting? Whereabouts is it, and how do you know it's this guy's family?
Thanks very much for that last call. So we took a sighting earlier on today of a pod of orca out towards offshore of Aramati, slightly north of Wellington. So we sent a dock boat up north to try and locate the pod. The sighting fitted the description of the pod that was around Pautanui Inlet on Sunday. So we think it's the same one, but we just can't confirm it at the moment. Obviously, the biggest challenge we've got at the moment is it's getting dark. We're probably going to call off the search for the pod tonight. But first thing in the morning, we'll start again. And really, we're looking for public to report any sightings to us. And really, any imagery you've got of a pod of orca in the Wellington area would be grateful, but also a sense of direction. Really positive. Hopefully it's the right pod. The number fitted the size, but we just can't confirm it at the moment. I think we've got, the darkness is beating us for now.
Okay, Ian, let's take a positive spin on this and for the moment assume that you're tracking the right whānau, right? How would you then get the little guy reunited, because they're quite a way apart?
Yeah, so obviously that's going to be one of the challenges. At the moment, we're focused on, the objective of reuniting the calf into its pod. 2 tasks. One is the rehabilitation of the calf here
down in Pemberton, and we've actually just got vets at the moment down there trying to rehydrate, do another health assessment. We've been doing that continuing through the day. Obviously, at the centre of all our response is the well-being and welfare of the orca, and we're closely monitoring that. If we think it's in a state to be moved, then we'll possibly look to do a relocation. Obviously, there's different methods we might use. The best method would hopefully to put it in a sling on the side of the boat and just move it a short distance and hopefully then place it into the pod. If it's a longer distance we have to work through, well, we'll need to work through scenarios and basically try and understand, is the health of the orca going to be compromised if it's a large distance and the choice of transport, and is that a good thing? And then we've got the awful decision about do we wait to see the pod's going to get closer and hold the orca for a bit longer. So it's not an easy task, and it's not one that we're particularly enjoying, but it's the one that we feel that we need to do if we want to get to the success point, which is release the orca back into its pod. And the whole time we're monitoring the welfare.
Ian, who makes that tough decision? Is it a single call on your shoulders, or is it a group of people, or how does it work?
It's a call on the department. The department has a statutory responsibility here, but obviously we're working very closely with a range of experts, both domestic and international, and very closely with iwi. But ultimately, that decision will rest with the department. But we're trying to do it with, we're trying to make good decisions based on the best available information from a range of experts.
So if this pod isn't its family, right, is there still a possibility that you could create a new connection with this calf? Would they adopt it, and how do you go about that?
No, it's a bit more challenging that. Obviously, that's been done in the past, but usually with older calves. Really the challenge we've got here is the calf not weaned. It would still be reliant on its mother, and so ideally we need to place the calf into its pod because of the lactating mother who can then feed the calf again. And so that's one of the challenges we've got here is it's not so much that the calf can survive on its own at the moment. It's got health issues, but also the fact it's not weaned is a big challenge for us.
So I heard that you were rehydrating it, giving it water, but what about food? Can you feed it in any way if it was relying on mother's milk in the ether?
We could try shortly. At the moment, we're just basically trying to stabilise the calf. In stabilising it, we're trying to reduce stress, but try and keep it hydrated. Doing the health assessment, and at some point we feel that we can give it some sort of nutrition, some sort of milk. We'll take expert opinion about the best way of doing that, and then decide if it's worthwhile trying that, or will it create new problems with us and new stresses for the calf. So it's a really difficult part that we've got here in making some of these tough calls.
Really appreciate your time, Ian. Best of luck. Ian Angus, who is DOC's Marine Species Manager, talking there about the orca separated from its mum. The British Prime Minister is pushing ahead with plans to lift all COVID restrictions early next week and get people packing the pubs again. In the UK, 87% of adults have now received their first dose of a COVID vaccine, and 2/3 have received a second. But with the infection rate accelerating, some scientists say Boris Johnson is taking too big a gamble. The ABC's Samantha Hawley reports. If not now, then when, is Boris Johnson's mantra.
We've come to a stage in the pandemic when there is no easy answer and no obvious date for unlocking.
But his language has softened. For months, he's promised once the COVID restrictions were gone, they'd be gone for good. Now, he has a very different approach.
It is absolutely vital that we proceed now with caution. And I cannot say this powerfully or emphatically enough.
Social distancing will go. Mask wearing will be voluntary. The pubs will be full to the brim again. The West End packed. And it will be back to the office.
If we were now to delay this fourth step, for instance, to September or later, then we would be reopening as the weather gets colder and as the virus acquires a greater natural advantage.
Sajid Javid is the new Health Secretary, leading the return to a pre-COVID world.
There will never be a perfect time to take this step, because we simply cannot eradicate this virus.
Don't be fooled. This is not a nation out of trouble. While 2/3 of adults will have been double vaccinated against COVID by next week, the infection rate is soaring. Across the UK, there are already around 30,000 new... Radio New Zealand Pacific is now closing on this frequency. Please retune to 7245 kilohertz in the 41 metre band. Once again, retune now to 7245 kilohertz in the 41 metre band.